What's up, boys? The pigs are back for another episode of the BGO podcast, courtesy of bgobsession.com. If you are new to us, please give us a like, a share, and a follow. Obviously, if you've been here before, you already know, but you can find us on all major streaming platforms, audio as well as video on YouTube and online, Facebook, Twitter, and of course at bgobsession.com. So, boys, Bob, you were running down a little bit about your most recent road trip. Little love with the with mom going on. What's up, man? What happened?
Yeah, we snuck back to Virginia yesterday. For those of you new to the podcast, I no longer live in the greater Washington D.C. Virginia metro area, although my mom does. So we snuck back and spent some time with mom on the family farm, and we hijacked her and ran up through New England and did a whole bunch of stuff. But the highlight of the trip was probably a 1 day, one off to Falling Water in Southwest Pennsylvania. Granted, I'm an architecture junkie. I started my college career thinking I was going to be an architect. Then I found out there was a lot of math involved, and so I gave that up. But I still love it as an art form, and so I got to tell everybody out there, if you've never been to Falling Water, go. It is absolutely worth it. It was a lot of fun. And take the in-depth tour. There's two different tours. Do the in-depth thing.
Falling Water is and you're gonna have to remind me of the architect because now it's escaping me. But
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Frank Lloyd Wright. Yep. The waterfall comes like down through the living room, right? He literally built the
No,
house
it's built over the waterfall. Yeah, so the
over the
stream
waterfall.
runs
Okay.
by the foundations of the house, and the living room is cantilevered out and suspended about 15 feet over the stream itself. And under the living room, the waterfall drops about 20 feet. So at one point in time, you're standing over about 35 feet of clear air. It's pretty amazing, man. It's this big concrete patio that's cantilevered out over the thing, and yeah, I
That's
was just
awesome.
I was in awe. I This is going to sound funny, and I'm sure somebody out there is going to go, "Oh, what a wuss!" But I nearly cried at one point in time because this has been a thing that's I've had a coffee table book of Falling Water in the house on the coffee table since college. It's been around longer than my wife, So
Don't admit that, okay? We will be.
I know she knows. She knows, and
She knows.
she was just as awed as I was. And the cool thing is, this was kind of one of those bucket list things for my mom too. So we managed to check it off for a bunch of people. It was very cool.
That's awesome. Paul, as we go around the table, catch up with you. It's been like a month since we've seen your beautiful face on our podcast. We've missed you, brother. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I have nothing to complain about. Kids are out of school. That means I'm out of school too for the next 2 months. And I'm entering the most beautiful time of the year because Wimbledon has started. I don't know that there are many people outside of a few of you that know that I'm an avid tennis fan. So this is like my, that portion of the calendar that you earmark. Like, I'm just in love with this time of year. I'm off from work and I get to watch Wimbledon every day. So all is
Did you
good.
say you've got 2 months?
Yeah, we get 2 months here in Canada. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean 2 months from now. When do you go back?
We go back on September 4th.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
talking to my aunt who is in the school system here in Northern Virginia. She's got like 2.5 weeks. Okay, so
Oh, wow.
like the kids aren't in session, but they have to report back after
Yeah.
a certain amount of time. Like, it's wild.
My
Yeah,
my
no.
wife is reporting back the first Monday in August, and she's got kids on like the 12th or the 13th or something.
Oh
Or
my
maybe it's
gosh.
and my oldest moves into her dorm on the 13th of August. So you said 2 months, and I'm like,
What's that?
Yeah, we get 2 months and we get paid in Canada as
Oh
well
my
for those 2
gosh.
months. So
Apparently,
yeah.
all the teachers need to move to Canada.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Tony, what's up, brother? We've been
Hey,
around
how's
a
it
little
going?
bit. What's going on with you?
Man, just excited for the weekend. And like
Mhm.
we have a 10-year-old daughter, and we drop her off at sleepaway camp on Sunday.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's good. But it's one of those things where my wife is, it's always emotional, like, oh, losing my dog, And then for me, I'm like, all right, see ya. Get a
It's
week off
time to
of,
go.
yeah,
So we get a break.
yeah.
I feel you. Well, if you can't tell, my walls are naked. I'm in the midst of a move. By this time next month, we'll probably be in our new house out in good old Middletown, Virginia. We'll be out way off 81. So it's now going to take me 2 hours to get to the stadium instead of an hour and 10 minutes, which is fantastic. But anyways, boys, good catching up with you. Now I guess we can jump into the meat of this thing. Um, Going back and forth a little bit, we're in a kind of a dead period. There's no real big current events right now. The Brandon Ayuk rumors have kind of subsided a little bit. I think a lot of that's pushing into next offseason now. I don't think the trade things are going to happen. I think the roster's basically set now. I'd be shocked if there was any big moves. But we talked about jumping into some positional debates, right? So I am curious. You three volunteered so we can rank our position groups based on the NFC East with our team versus the other. Well, I guess we'll look at all four teams and we'll rank them accordingly. So the first one is, I guess, what we deem is the least offensive of our division is the Giants. So who had the Giants? And we can run down some of the position groups and see what we think.
Yeah, I have the Giants. And least is a good term because I think their roster overall is probably the least. Um, too. And what do we see? We looked quarterback. So they've got
Hmm.
Daniel Jones, who is aces against us, but then doesn't do much against the rest of the league. And they picked up Drew Lock, who's he's Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito is their third string. So they don't have a lot of excitement going on.
Tommy DeVito, who by the way
Quarterback.
played, I want to say, some really meaningful minutes for them last year, right? Wasn't he the
Yeah,
guy?
yeah, he had to play a
Okay.
lot.
So I guess what Tony, we'll start with you then. Quarterbacks, do we want to rank them now? Do we want to go ahead and jump in the quarterback rankings now? Well, no, we can't. We have to talk about all of them. Paul, who'd you
Yeah,
have for the quarterbacks?
Yeah, I had the Eagles, easily my most hated team in this division. But
Easily,
sad,
easily.
yeah, I think so. At this juncture, yes. Back in the 90s, I would probably feed you a different story, but currently my most hated team. But anyways, I sadly only have fairly good things to say about the Eagles quarterback room. We obviously know that they're led by Jalen Hurts. He seems to be giving Philadelphia what every team in the NFL currently wants at the quarterback position. And that essentially being a guy that can be a perennial MVP candidate, a guy that can lead his team deep into the playoffs. Um, you know, they have a player at that position that other teams are aspiring to achieve as well. He's an accomplished player, two-time Pro Bowler. Last year the guy had, I think, 38 total touchdowns between passing and rushing. That was second in the league, only to Josh Allen. So I mean, he's that dual threat quarterback. Turnovers hurt him a bit last year. He had 15 interceptions. That factored into the Eagles slump down the stretch. I think they went like 1-6 in their last 7 games. So he's obviously going to be looking to bounce back. But that all being said, I think the big thing with Jalen Hurts next year is going to be how he meshes with his new offensive coordinator because Brian Johnson is gone. He's in DC now, and he's going to be working with Kellen Moore next year. So that'll undoubtedly be a little bit of a transition. But again, he's a player that's entering the prime of his career, and he's really, really solid. I do like their addition of Kenny Pickett. One of our beloved members here on this podcast, Ohm,
Mark.
was one who really, really liked Kenny Pickett coming out of college. He's started 24 games in his career. He hasn't been, he obviously didn't live up to what the Steelers thought he would become. But I think as a backup in Philadelphia, I think he can project to be one of those higher end backups in the league, and someone that if you have to trot out there for a couple weeks, you can do a lot worse than Kenny Pickett. So I think they have a pretty solid tandem at the quarterback position in Philadelphia.
All right, Bob. You want to talk about the team we all actually hate and leave Paul out of it?
I drew the Cowboys by virtue of chiming in last and by virtue of the fact that I'm about 20 miles from the stadium, and a whole lot closer to the practice facility than that. In fact, a couple of my favorite breweries are up right around the practice facility. So I'm no stranger to Frisco and that area up there. But man, the Cowboys are in a weird place this year. For those people that are not paying attention at home, Dak Prescott is in the last year of his contract. Mike McCarthy is in the last year of his contract. And, we just stole a bunch of their coaches and a bunch of their players. And they did next to nothing in free agency. This is a team that everybody in the local area that's a Cowboy fan is kind of staring at. They're looking at this season with some trepidation. There are a lot of questions. There are more questions than answers. Having said that, there's a lot of stability amongst the skill players in Dallas, starting with quarterback position. And obviously, Dak Prescott's going to be the starter again this year. He's backed up by Cooper Rush, who a lot of people thought, might get stolen away to play someplace else. I mean, he's been stellar in backup work. And then hiding there in the depth chart in the third slot, they traded for Trey Lance last year with San Francisco. So they've got three guys there who have all started in this league, who have all played well. Prescott had a really good season last year. I mean, just in terms of raw numbers, the guy threw for over 4,500 yards. He had almost a 70% completion ratio. 36 TDs against 9 interceptions. He did take 39 sacks, which is a little much for a guy going to the playoffs, right? And I mean, by all accounts, he had a stellar year. The problem is, yet again, the Cowboys went out in the first round of the playoffs, like they tend to do. And the Dallas area, the whole Metroplex is pretty well split on whether or not you lay that at the feet of Dak Prescott, whether you lay that at the feet of Mike McCarthy, or whether you lay that at the feet of Jerry Jones, who, of course, is the perennial whipping boy because he's the only one that's been there every single year they've gone out in the first round of the playoffs. So, I mean, that's kind of where Dallas is, and not a lot's going to change. The big question is not this year. The big question is what happens in the offseason next year. And there are a lot of people around here that think this could be Dak's last year in Dallas.
Makes sense. A lot of that makes sense. So I guess now it's time to rank. We'll go around the horn. Before we do, I'll just recap. I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have pretty good idea of what our roster looks like. But the Washington quarterbacks are, of course, headlined by Jaden Daniels, followed up by Marcus Mariota. Third, I think we all believe, is Sam Hartman, who is a late round draft, who is an undrafted free agent. We paid a lot of money to, if you want to look in the terms of a undrafted free agent. And then Jeff Driscoll was brought in as a vet guy who's 31. I don't think anybody's really holding their breath that he's going to make the team. I think it's a pretty we can all assume it's Daniels, then Mariota, then Hartman right now in the depth chart. And if I'm wrong, please feel free to rebut me. But there's a lot of question marks surrounding our squad and what we're going to do just because of how young it is. It's very quickly become a young and an old. Mariota and Driscoll both north of 30. Daniels and Hartman were both rookies. So All right. Well, I will throw it, Paul, since you let it off. Also, and say, what's your ranking? How would you rank the NFC East at the quarterback position?
Yeah,
What's your progression?
so it's pretty straightforward and easy for me. I think Philadelphia clocks in number one, Dallas number two. Um, I would give New York the slight edge over Washington at this point in the number three spot, Washington at four, but that can all change by, I would say, the end of October. If Jaden Daniels comes out strong out the gate, and acclimates himself well to this league, I think that we can easily leapfrog New York in terms of quarterback rankings at some point this season. Why do I give Philadelphia the edge over Dallas? Bob was alluding to it. Comes down to production in the playoffs. Jalen Hurts can say that he's led Philadelphia to a Super Bowl, not a victory, but got them there at least. And I'm pretty certain there would be a lot of Dallas fans that would take that opportunity if Dak Prescott can actually figure out how to win in the playoffs. So it comes down to playoff production, and I have a hard time giving Dallas the edge over Philadelphia in that regard.
Tony, what you got, brother?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. I'll go with the Eagles for number one, just because he's been Hurt has been proven, and he gets it done in crunch time. And then two, I'll go with Dallas, just because Dak has shown like a competence level of quarterback, but like we all know, when it comes to crunch time, he chokes out. So that's why I'll give the edge to Philly there. And then for me, I really hate on Daniel Jones. I just don't think he's got much. So I'm gonna put our team at three just because of the potential of Jaden Daniels. And yeah, and then for me, I'll put the Giants at the bottom, 1 through 3. They're nothing special there.
Brother Bob, what you got, brother?
I think I'm going to go with Tony's lineup. I can totally see where Paul's coming from with Daniels going last as a rookie, and it's very tempting. And then I stopped and thought about it for a moment. When, you know what, if Sam Howell were my starter this year, he'd be 3 and Daniel Jones would be 4. And there's no way in the world I'm gonna, I'm with Tony. Daniel Jones doesn't play well against anybody but us. I'm sticking with Hurts as number one for pretty much all the same reasons Paul said, and I'll throw one more in there. Durability. The guy doesn't miss time. He doesn't miss time. And in the immortal words of everybody's favorite Washington coach, Joe Gibbs, availability is the most important ability, especially when you're a franchise quarterback, because the odds are the drop off from 1 to 2 is generally speaking fairly significant at that position. I can't even, Kenny Pickett is number 2 and that might be an upgrade over Mariota from last year, if we're really honest about it. I'm not sure how I feel about it completely, but yeah, I think Hurts is probably the guy, and it's durability, and it's the fact that he figured out how to get him all the way to a Super Bowl when Dak can't get out of the first or the second round if they have a bye. So he can't win a single playoff game, much less 3 in a row. So, but Dak's a quarterback that half the league would kill to have. So there you go.
Yeah, I've got to follow suit, but I'm going to put a caveat on this, that this is just based on what we've seen. I think all 4 of us would agree we would rather have Jaden Daniels on a rookie deal than the other 3 quarterbacks on what they've been paid. And tell me if I'm wrong there, but Jaden Daniels is getting less than a quarter of what they're getting. So the entire roster construction changes. All 3 of the other quarterbacks in our division have been paid, and they've been paid as top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. And Hurts, or as you guys said, Dak's up against it again. This is his second contract, right?
So I was just looking that up. I think he got franchised. I think didn't he? Let me look.
Tell me, you might tell me I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Dak's already gotten a contract. Maybe I'm wrong. No, he might be in the 5th year. but still,
No,
he's
no,
still
no, no. He's gotten a contract. He was drafted in 2016. He's had a contract.
okay.
My question is whether or not they burned both franchise tag years. He is absolutely hitting free agency this offseason unless they
Mhm.
sign a long-term deal during the season.
Mhm.
And the
Right.
way it's looking right now, both sides are aiming at that free agent thing. It looks like Dallas is willing to let him test the market.
So if you want to talk about the 30,000-foot view, I think Washington moves up in the lineage. And I'm saying that as a fan. Total bias. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm ranking them as we're talking, I have to agree. Philly, Dallas, Washington, Giants. The Giants are in just disarray right now. And I say that they'll probably beat us twice this year. It is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, but all right, Paul, you want to lead us off with wide receivers?
Yeah, certainly. I can totally do that. So again, much like the quarterback position, the Eagles have a lot of riches here, led by obviously AJ Brown. We all know about him. You know, he's one of the top wide receivers in the league, star power written all over him. Um, you know, he had record-setting season last year with Philadelphia, had 106 catches, over 1,400 receiving yards. I mean, he's everything you want in a wide receiver. He's physical, he's big-bodied. You know, he's got a pretty good connection with Jalen Hurts. He can take over games when he wants to and when he decides that he wants to. Secondly, they have Devonta Smith. I would say that he's arguably one of the better number two receivers in the NFL. He's eclipsed 1,000 yards 2 straight seasons in a row. He's got uh, over 13 yards per reception average over his career thus far. So he's that, you know, home run threat type thing. Uh, you know, I think he's just ultimately a great complement to AJ Brown, who's, you know, that physical presence, and he adds a bit of fireworks to their offense. The big question with Philadelphia is who's going to be their number three coming into this season. They're pretty well established at their first two spots, and I'm kind of intrigued by some of the players that they have further down on their depth chart. They got a few young guys in Johnny Wilson, who they drafted out of Florida State. He's 6'6", 230 pounds. I imagine the Eagles are going to want to use that body in the red zone and be able to find mismatches for him there. They have Aeneas Smith, who I believe we talked about and previewed. One of us did when we were doing the draft podcasts. They actually drafted him with our fifth round pick this past season in that swap of picks that we had with the Eagles. He's one of those guys that can pretty much do everything for you. He lines up all over the field at wide receiver. He's lined up at running back in college. They'll put him in the slot. You know, he's that gadget, do it all type player. I'll be really intrigued to see how he fits into that roster and what they're able to do with him. They have Paris Campbell. Paris Campbell was a former teammate of Terry McLaurin at Ohio State,
Ooh,
former second round
sneaky
draft pick.
Ohio State link right there. I
Yeah,
didn't realize he was there.
yeah. Former second round pick of the Colts. He signed with the Giants last year, but ultimately did nothing with them. His best season came in 2022. He had 63 catches, over 600 yards receiving. So, I mean, you know, there's something to build off of there, but he just hasn't lived up to what the Colts ultimately thought they had in him.
If
Last but
only
not least,
De'Ami Brown could live up to Paris Campbell.
yeah.
Sorry.
Last but not least, they added John Ross, and we all know about John Ross. He's, you know, former 40-time record holder until it was broken this past year at the combine. He's basically a guy who was hyped up quite a bit, and I think his 40-time got him drafted a lot higher than he ultimately should have by Cincinnati way back when. He's again never lived up to his hype um, after being drafted, and this is ultimately probably his last crack in the NFL. So the big thing with Philadelphia is who's going to step up and become that third, fourth target beyond AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. But ultimately, any team in the league would kill to have those two, you know, at the top of their depth chart. That's what I got for the Eagles.
All right, we'll pivot. Bob, what do you got for the Cowboys?
Man, this group is going to look a lot like everybody saw last year. CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson are going to be the guys. If you look at last year's numbers, Lamb and Ferguson are the only two guys on the team that had more than 100 targets.
Jake Ferguson, he's tight end.
Yeah, he's the tight end. Yeah.
So
We're talking about just
we're
wide
talking wide receivers.
In my head, it's all receivers, but yeah, you're right. It's in Dallas, it's CeeDee Lamb and it's everybody else in the wide receiver room. Although they do have Brandon Cooks. I got to tell you, as Brandon Cooks, the owner of Brandon Cooks in fantasy last year, I feel like he was painfully underused by the Cowboys. But when you've got a receiver like CeeDee Lamb, he's going to be the first read. I don't care what happens. He just is. And it is what it is. CeeDee Lamb had 181 targets. Brandon Cooks had 81 targets on the season. Lamb caught 135 for an average of 13 yards per catch, 1,749 yards and 12 TDs. The dude's just a monster and semi-unstoppable. Cooks will remain number 2. Their number 3 guy last year, Michael Gallup, went away. He left in free agency. This is one of the and honestly, probably one of the better third wide receivers in the league. He was a deep threat when he was healthy. That's another problem, and that's part of the way Dallas has explained letting him go, is that he hasn't played. This last year was the first year he played a full season in quite some time, but he really didn't start the season completely healthy. He played all 17 games, but to start the season, he was highly ineffective. So they let him go in free agency, and they have not signed anybody. They also didn't draft anybody. They're filling other holes, and they're preparing to have to. I think they have to pay CeeDee Lamb this year.
He's another piece of the Cowboys Rubik's Cube, right? If I'm not mistaken.
When it comes right down to it, that's the reason there hasn't been a lot of player personnel moves other than bleeding people to other teams, is because this team doesn't have the cap space right now. And they really aren't going to have the cap space if they choose to pay Dak Prescott in February or March.
Well, and you know who's on the horizon? It's Micah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, that's the thing, so you got CeeDee Lamb to pay now. You got Micah Parsons coming, and so
loves Dan Quinn. So.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, even if you take the same route with him that you took with Prescott, and of course we're getting a little far afield at the moment, but even if you take the same route there, he's still going to be 20 million plus on a tag. So it's Dallas is in money trouble, which is why the receiving core looks very much like it did last year. The number 3 guy this year will be Jalen Tolbert, who was number 4 last year. Kid didn't play poorly. He had 22 receptions on 36 targets, 12.12 yards per reception.
He burned the hell out of us, if I'm not mistaken. But then again,
and he had 2 TDs, including a long of 45, right? So, I mean, the kid's got big playability. Obviously, and they believe in him taking Gallup's position. The question here in my mind is going to be durability. If any of those top 3 guys get hurt, I'm not looking at anybody in the depth chart here that just jumps out at me. Now, that doesn't mean anything. Guys step up in this league all the time and go from nobodies to somebody in a game. But I'd be worried about it if I were a Cowboy fan.
Tony, what do you got, brother?
All right.
The
Giants. There's actually some potential here with this position group. They got Malik Neighbors, who they drafted. If he lives up to his potential, that's the number 1 receiver, and from LSU. A lot of the tape we've all watched of Jaden Daniels, a lot of his big time plays were to this guy. So they're banking a lot on him. And then they also have Darius Slayton, who's pretty solid. He's one of those guys that's not going to carry a team, but he's not horrible. He's like a 700-yard receiver in that range. So he's pretty good. They've got Allen Robinson, who's a vet that's kind of bounced around. So a journeyman kind of guy. Then they got some young guys, Wandale Robinson they drafted recently, and Jalen Hyatt. I actually like Jalen Hyatt coming out of Tennessee. I thought he was really good, a good deep threat, a speedy guy. So we'll see about that. And then after that, it's just a bunch of random kind of
Bunch of dudes.
back at the roster type dudes.
All right. Well, quick rundown. Washington, obviously, we have Terry McLaurin. He's the cornerstone wide receiver of our squad. Jahan Dotson coming into third year. So now's the time to kind of put up or shut up. And then Luke McCaffrey was a draft pick. The other rookie that we have on the team was Marcus Rosemary Saint, who had the catch of the training camp. If you guys were following along, he had the one-handed grab. Couple notable off-season additions: Demir Bird and Olamide Zacchaeus are the two off-season additions that were part of the wide receiver rooms. And then the back end of it is guys Bryson Tremaine, who ironically is the tallest wide receiver in our group at 6'4" and 212. Mitch Tinsley, Dax Milne, Davion Davis, and rounded out by the vet of all vets, Jamison Crowder. I will say this is the year, if anybody is going to make their name in this league, De'Ami Brown. This is the time, bro. Like, now do it or don't do it. If you can't do it now, you're gonna forever be a fifth guy on a roster, And if you latch on to a career here, if you can't make it happen now, you're gonna be you're in trouble. And then the last guy I'll mention, Kaz Allen, who was our special teams darling from last preseason. I'm interested in see what he can do in special teams. I will be shocked if he actually makes the roster as a legitimate playmaker, because I don't think they're going to be pigeonholed in our sixth wide receiver has to be our return man. I think they're going to be looking up and down the roster for that. So if you're going to earn that spot, you got to earn it. It's not going to just be you make one or two plays in the preseason training camp and find your way on a roster. So I guess I'll tee it off. I'm going to go ahead and rank the skill positions at wide receiver. I'm going to put Philly 1, anchored by AJ Brown. It's hard to argue a guy that's an all-pro. Terry McLaurin, I think, to this point, hasn't had the opportunities that AJ Brown has had, even though AJ Brown did it with Justin Fields, the quarterback. And obviously Jalen Hurts. But I think he can get there if we have a more stable offense and more stability there. As far as the rest of it, though, he is an anchor. He's kind of like CMC with the Niners. You know what I mean? The Niners are going to have the best running back group in the NFL because they have Christian McCaffrey. AJ Brown's going to float that level up a lot higher. Next, I'm going to put Washington, because I think Dallas, there's not much behind CeeDee Lamb. You got CeeDee Lamb and then you got everybody else. And there's nobody that really strikes fear. Washington, I think, is a little deeper at wide receiver. Next is Dallas, and then the last is the Giants. The Giants just don't scare me. Malik Neighbors has to do something before I'm willing to put him in a position that, and I think he's the best wide receiver in this draft, better than Harrison, but he's got to do something first. What do you got, Bob? I'll throw it at you.
I think Philadelphia's got to be number one. I mean, you already talked about AJ Brown. Devontae Smith is a scary dude in his own right, though. He may be one of the strongest number 2 wide receivers in the league for me. And as far as a 1-2 punch is concerned, I think it's really hard to find a team in the NFL that's got better starting wideouts than Philadelphia does. So I got to go Philadelphia 1. I'm torn between, Brandon Cooks is a little terrifying at times. The guy's got speed to waste, if we're really honest about it. And if Dallas ever figures out how to use him, I think he and CeeDee Lamb make a pretty terrifying 1-2. my heart says Washington's receivers are better, but the reality is, you know, Jalen's got to show me something this year. He took a step backwards last year. He had that sophomore slump thing going on. I want to see more from him this year. So I'm going to say Dallas 2, Washington 3, and New York 4. New York is number 4 as much because Daniel Jones is the quarterback throwing to those wide receivers as the wide receivers themselves, if I'm really honest about it, right? You know, I have a rule in fantasy football. If I don't trust the quarterback, I don't take the receiver. It doesn't matter how good the receiver is, right? I would leave I'd leave the best receiver in the league. I'd leave Justin Jefferson sitting on the board if I didn't trust the quarterback throwing him the football. And that's kind of how I feel about all the guys that suit up in blue for New York. So there you go.
Paul, what do you got, brother?
I think my order is going to be identical to Bob's. Philadelphia. I'm not going to repeat what you guys already said and what I previewed earlier in regards to them. They're the clear-cut winner. Dallas number 2, Washington 3, New York 4. That all being said, if we can get the version of Jahan Dotson from his rookie season and have him build upon that trajectory, I think we can easily move into the number 2 spot. But I don't think that last season did him any favors, and I think there are a lot of questions at this point. He's one of the guys that we definitely need a huge bounce back from this coming season if we want this offense to propel forward. So, yeah, sadly, we're in the number 3 spot for me at this point, but that can easily change.
Tony, rank them up, brother.
All right. For me, yeah, like everybody, got to go Eagles number 1 with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I mean, AJ Brown, he got it done even when he was in Tennessee, and it was just like Ryan Tannehill, who I think is a game manager kind of quarterback, and he still produced. So yeah, I'll give it to the Eagles. Number 2, I'll give us the slight edge just because I think after Terry we have more potential than what's after CeeDee Lamb for the Cowboys. So I'll go us and then Dallas. And then yeah, the Giants will bring up the rear on that one. And like you guys said, they have some young talent there. They might be good, but given who's throwing them the ball and everything, you might not know until they get a new quarterback in there.
All right, next up is tight ends. I guess I can tee it off. Just reminder of the Washington tight ends, and I can run down the list. Biggest offseason addition is Zach Ertz. Biggest draft addition is Ben Sinnott. Still on the roster is Cole Turner, and then rounding out the tight end group right now is John Bates and Colson Yankoff. I think Bates is the only guy that's actually logged. Well, I don't think John Bates is the only guy that's actually logged meaningful minutes for this team. Cole Turner is a lot of projection, a lot of hope, a lot of belief. Ertz, I think, is going to be a veteran presence. I don't see him catching 50 or more balls. It's a lot to ask for a guy, but if he can get 45 at 600 and a couple touchdowns, that's a lot. Ben Sinnott is the X factor. I think a lot of our determination of the tight end group is going to be based on what he can do. It's going to be, can that guy be? What are your expectations and aspirations? I mean, a beloved name around here is Chris Cooley, a guy that can line up as an H-back. He can line up outside. He can line up in the backfield. He can do a lot of things. He can be a lead blocker. He can take a screen pass. Those are the kind of things that I would love to see from that guy. And I think if he can execute those things, he can be an effective weapon. But I do wonder, actively speaking, if we have a true tight end. There's no George Kittle on this roster. There's no Travis Kelce. Of course, those guys are once in a life, once in a draft class kind of guys that you find. But there's some questions. So that being said, I'll throw it to Tony. Go ahead and lead us off, brother.
All right, so tight ends for the Giants, they have Daniel Bellinger, who's someone they drafted a couple years ago, who still hasn't really proven anything yet. Then they drafted Theo Johnson, a tight end from Penn State. He's got potential. I know leading up to the draft, a lot of our fans were hoping we get him in the middle to late rounds. So he could be a good pickup for them. And I imagine could earn the starting job the way he's playing. But he can play. And then after that is just a bunch of journeymen and no name type of guys.
One name I did leave off, I will say, honorable mention Armani Rogers. He seemed to be he could execute. He could be kind of an X Factor type, but he hasn't shown it. He's gotten hurt, so
Yeah.
didn't want to leave him out of the conversation. Bob, what's Dallas looking like?
So, I brought up Jake Ferguson earlier when I thought we were talking about all the receivers at once. Ferguson is going to be the lead dog again. I don't think there's any question about that. Although behind him, they do have Luke Schoonmaker. And he was a second-round draft pick last year, right? Picked in the top 60 of the 2023 draft. So you got to figure that Dallas is expecting some stuff from him. He was slowed up this last year by, some physical stuff. He only had 7 catches. 7 catches? Wait, hang on. That doesn't sound right. Am I right? 8 receptions on 15 targets for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jake Ferguson is definitely the class in Dallas, though. 71 receptions on 102 targets last year. 10.7 yard average per reception. 5 TDs. He had a long of 40. And he had 8 big plays. The guy is definitely Dak's number 2 target, at almost any given point in time. He's also not a bad blocker. He's a pure tight end. He's not a bad guy off the line. They're better all around tight ends in the league, but if we're being really straight up about it, I think he's probably the best all around tight end in our division. So it's a strength for the Cowboys for sure.
What you got, Paul?
Yeah, so the Eagles tight end group is quite strong at the top, obviously with Dallas Goedert. I would argue that he's probably easily a top 10 tight end in the NFL. He had a career best last year in receptions. He had 59, complemented that with almost 600 yards receiving. He's a go-to piece in the Eagles passing game and someone that can be used as a weapon all over the field. Pretty good blocker as well. Hello to our special guest. Yeah, he ranks 3rd in the NFL among tight ends since 2021 with almost 13 yards per catch. So that's pretty impressive. He's essentially another headache on offense in Philadelphia that defenses need to plan for. If you lose sight of this guy, if you ignore him, if you treat him as an afterthought, he has the potential to hurt you. Behind him, there's not much. They have Jack Stoll, who's a younger guy. He does a lot of the dirty work in a run game, uses an inline blocker and such. And they have Grant Calcaterra, who also is another young piece behind Goddard. He's seen as being more of that athletic runner after the catch type tight end. But in a nutshell, if Goddard went down, Philadelphia would have some concerns at the tight end position.
So, just listening to this, I don't think there's any team that's really, I guess maybe Philly, but I don't think anybody has any X factor at tight end, right? Tell me I'm wrong.
No, not yet. I don't
I
think anyone's
think-
proven.
Yeah, I think Ferguson's about as close as it gets. The one thing I didn't mention, of his 761 yards, 425 of those came as yards after catch.
After catch, yeah.
After catch, yeah. So for a tight end, the guy is
Two-thirds of his yards are after he puts
Right.
his hand on the ball.
Yeah. So I mean, for a tight end, those aren't shabby numbers. He had better yards after catch numbers than everybody else on the Cowboys team except CeeDee Lamb.
Mm-hmm.
So Granted,
All
he
right.
had more receptions to work with too. So, but
Well, then go ahead, Bob. Tee it off. What's your rankings?
if I'm just throwing things out there, I'm gonna say Dallas, Philly, New York, Washington.
Wow.
And Washington because we're basically unproven, or we're really old and haven't played a lot in the last year and a half. Zach Ertz could turn out to be something amazing for us. He could also turn out to be a guy that spends more time on the sideline than he does out on the field. I really like Ben Sinnott. Don't get me wrong. I really do. But I think there's a lot of question there as to what this offense is going to look like. And the tight end is one of the biggest question marks to me in terms of what this offense is going to look like, how much Cliff Kingsbury is going to use them, how much time they're going to spend blocking as opposed to out and routes and catching the football. I just don't know what to expect. And so it's all the question marks that have me putting them 4. I think Jake Ferguson is the class of the league. Dallas has put high draft picks into the tight end position each of the last 2 seasons. So there's depth there if Schoenmakers can stay healthy this year. And nobody else can really say that except maybe Washington, assuming Ertz and Sinnott actually work out. I like Goddard. Goddard's been around for a while too, right? Ferguson and Schoenmaker are both 25 and under. I feel like that's the way it plays out at the moment, considering the way the tight ends have been used in this division, or the mystery around how they'll be used. And again, Daniel Jones throwing the football to his tight end, and the tight end in New York is better than I think Jones is going to make him look.
All right. Tony, what do you got, bro? Let's go rank the tight ends.
Yeah, for tight ends, yeah, it's kind of tough at the top. It's because I think Goddard's a little more dynamic, but then like you said, Dallas with Ferguson is he's kind of more steady Eddie and gets the job done and is kind of a go-to guy for Dallas. So I'm just gonna go with Dallas because of that, because he's a big option for Dak. And then I also like Schoonmaker. I think he has potential to be something. Whereas as Philadelphia, they don't, like you mentioned, Paul. There's not much after Goddard if he were to get hurt. So I'll go Dallas, Philly, and then of the unproven players left with Washington and New York, I'm gonna go with Washington just because Ertz, he does have to stay healthy, but he's at least proven it before in the past. And Sinnott, hopefully he can show through. And the Giants right now don't have anything remarkable, although Theo Johnson has potential to be a good player.
Got Paul.
I'm going to go with the Cowboys number 1 as well, echoing what others have said. Dallas has just traditionally always been a team that gets the most out of their tight ends. Even going back to the days of Aikman, they had Jay Novacek, always found a way to have him involved in the offense. Witten, now we have Jake Ferguson, who has been able to ensure that there's a seamless transition at that position since moving on from Witten. I don't want to call them a tight end factory, but they always get production out of their tight ends. So, just based on track record alone and the fact that Prescott likes to use his tight ends and involve them heavily in their offense, I have to give them the nod at number 1. I would say that talent-wise, like from an individual player standpoint, Goddard is probably the most talented individual at the position, but there's just not enough surrounding him in Philadelphia to give the Eagles the nod at number 1. So I'd slot Philadelphia in at 2. I'll put Washington at 3. I really have high hopes for Ben Sinnott. I really loved that draft pick. They picked him in the second round. Am I correct? Was it second or the third?
Second.
Third.
Yeah, I think
Second? No,
after all
third.
those
First
trades.
pick in the third round.
Oh,
First pick in
Right?
the third round. Okay, so regardless, I mean to use one of their earlier picks
Newton
on that
was our
type of
second round
player,
pick.
I I think that they have a plan for him. So I think we're going to get a pretty decent return from him, and I certainly hope that he's going to be a high impact player for us down the road. And obviously, I'm putting the Giants in the basement once again.
All right. Well, I have a bias. I will say I will take Dallas first. And the reason I have a bias is because on this very podcast, 2.5 years ago, I had Jake Ferguson circled as a third round pick for our Washington Commanders. So I'm a little bitter that we didn't take him. I will say I'm going to slot Washington ahead of Philly. And the reason I'm going to slot Washington ahead of Philly is I think we have a little bit of a scar tissue with what Philly does with their tight ends against us. It kind of hurts our feelings a lot. We seem to bring out the best of their tight end group, not actually be able to look at their tight end group as effectively as it should be. One of them used to be on their team is now on our team in Zachers. He used to make us hurt our feelings quite a bit. So I'm going to go Dallas, Washington, Philly, then the Giants. Last group is running backs. Tony, I'm gonna ask you to tee it off. What do you got on running
All right,
backs?
the Giants. That was like their big offseason news was not keeping Saquon, and they went out in free agency and got Devin Singletary, and their coaches and the front office guys know him because Buffalo drafted him, and he played there for several years. Then last year he was in Houston. He's pretty good. He's just a solid back. He's like a 800-yard back, and receives decent receiver too. And then after that they have Eric Gray, who they drafted the year previous from Oklahoma, who's still a young guy. They're going to see what they got out of him, and Tyrone Tracy Jr., who they just drafted from Purdue in the middle rounds. So it's Devin Singletary, then young guys that have yet to prove themselves, but you never know with running backs. So decent pickup with Singletary, but no Saquon, and we'll see how that plays out for the Giants.
So Paul, go ahead and tell us where Saquon went.
Yeah, so he went to Philadelphia, and he was he went
Yeah.
to the Eagles, and he was the big, obviously the big free agent splash for the Eagles this past year. But that all being said, after his phenomenal rookie season where he had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, he's never been able to live up to that. He's had some injury issues. Um, I was doing a little bit of a dive on him, and looking at him a little bit more closely, and I found it interesting that in his 6 seasons in the NFL, now granted, one of those seasons he was pretty much out almost the whole year, but in 4 of those 6 seasons, he's averaged less than 4 yards per carry on average. We all know that he was, he wasn't running behind a great offensive line with the Giants last year, but he's certainly going to be running behind one of the top tier O lines this coming season. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts him and if he'll be able to recapture some of his old magic. I think that Philadelphia is going to involve him heavily in the passing game as well as the run game. Given the amount of money that they gave him, I think that he's obviously going to be someone they want to become a focal part of their offense. Behind him, they have Kenny Gainwell. When I look at Kenny Gainwell, I kind of call him the Antonio Gibson 2.0. There's a lot of parallels between those guys. Both of them went to Memphis. Both of them thought of as being like those home run threats, those dual threats out of the backfield. But like Antonio Gibson, Kenny Gainwell's career hasn't amounted to much yet. He's been more of that third down guy, that 2-minute offense guy. Philadelphia hasn't really seemed to be able to figure out how to use him in a manner that suits him best. Again, an Antonio Gibson clone. I think that's a story we're all too familiar with in Washington. Last but not least, they have other running backs in their roster, but the only other one that I can see as potentially being relevant this year is Will Shipley. They drafted him in the 4th round out of Clemson. I think that he's probably going to be the replacement for Kenny Gainwell a year down the road. Kenny Gainwell's on his last year of his rookie deal. But he's a guy that's got some versatility as a runner, as a receiver, as well as a kick returner. So I can certainly see them using Will Shipley in the Kenny Gainwell role in seasons to come. So that's what we got for Philadelphia's top 3.
All right, just a rundown on the Commanders running back room. It's headlined by Brian Robinson Jr., who's returning, followed by Chris Rodriguez. Biggest offseason addition is Austin Eckler. I don't think anybody can argue that. Austin Jones is a rookie out of USC, and then Michael Wiley is an undrafted rookie out of Arizona. I think we can all agree that Robinson's probably going to be what you would pigeonhole into your workhorse. Eckler's probably going to be your more third down passing situation running back. Beyond that, Rodriguez might be the battering ram, but I don't think we're expecting huge things from him. So, unfortunately, it is kind of a shallow running back room, but I think it's versatile. I don't know if that makes sense. Bob, what do you got with the Cowboys in their running back room?
In the realm of everything old is new again, Ezekiel Elliott is back in town after a season in New England that was pretty much forgettable as far as I can tell. Zeke is an interesting cat, and if they use him right, I think it's got possibilities for Dallas. The problem is Zeke is going to turn 29 here in about 3 weeks. And we all know what happens as running backs approach 30 years of age, unless your name is Emmitt Smith, right? Guys start to fall off a cliff unless they're handled correctly. Behind him is Rico Dowdle, who backed up Tony Pollard last year. Pollard was they let Pollard go on a fairly large contract, actually, to Tennessee in the offseason. It was a little bit of a surprise how much money Tennessee threw at Tony Pollard, to be honest with you. However, I felt like Tony Pollard was the class of the Dallas running back room for about 3 years now, and I wasn't surprised at all 2 years ago when they let Elliott walk. But Elliott was willing to take a ridiculously low contract. I mean, he's playing on like $1.2 million a year this year on a 1-year deal with the Cowboys. Behind, third guy on the depth chart is Deuce Vaughn, a guy I was really high on coming out of college. He was at K-State. He's somebody I actually talked about, potentially being a late round pick for Washington. He ended up going to Dallas, where his dad is part of the scouting program. So kind of a fun, heartwarming story there. Dad actually got to call his son on draft night and tell Deuce he'd been drafted by the Cowboys. And I mean, even if you hate the Cowboys, you kind of got to like the family connection there. But he didn't do much last year. He had, almost no touches. I mean, like less than 20 touches on the season. Pollard and Dowdle handled all of it, and I kind of expect Elliott and Dowdle to handle pretty much most of it this year. The question's going to be what kind of holes that offensive line can open up, and they've lost some guys in that offensive line. So I have real doubts about the Dallas running game this year.
I agree. So, Paul, let's rank them up, brother. What do you got?
All right, so you're putting me on the spot going first, but I'm gonna go Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Dallas. And I'm normally not one who's really high on my team, but I am at the running back position, and I'm very hopeful that a new offensive coordinator and a new offensive scheme will be able to put our running backs in positions where they can thrive and succeed. I love Brian Robinson Jr. I felt like Eric Bieniemy did not use this guy properly whatsoever, and I honestly think that over the course of his career thus far in the NFL, especially last season, Brian Robinson has been underused. I think that this is a guy who can be a workhorse. I think he needed to be a focal point of our offense last year. He's got a ton of upside. He runs really hard. He's a guy that can hurt you in the fourth quarter. And in my opinion, he's built for that NFC East brand of football. And I think he can, I think he's got a lot of value going forward. And I think he can be a great, great player for us, and someone that we need to lean more heavily on. I would not underestimate the value of Austin Eckler in this offense, especially given the Anthony Lynn connection. He knows a thing or two about the value of Austin Eckler and what he brings to an NFL roster. And I'm expecting really big things out of Austin Eckler. And I think that he can be one of the bigger surprises and bigger impact free agents that we added this year. And as you were alluding to, Derek, as well, I love that, that hammer role that a guy like Chris Rodriguez can play. You need a few inches, you need a yard on fourth down, what have you, at the goal line. I think he's well suited for that type of thing. So I really like what we have at the running back position. Now, granted, a lot of that is going to be dependent on, hopefully the improvements along our offensive line, but there's certainly potential there. So this is the one group I'm high on the offensive side of the ball.
All right, very good. Tony, what do you got, brother?
It's funny, actually. Yeah, I'm right with Paul on this one. I think legit that if you just look at the top two backs combined on every team, I do think Washington comes out on top with B Rob and Eckler. Yeah, I think B Rob's just a dog. He'll just go get it. And last year he did show that he can receive the ball too. So he can catch it out on the wing and then just truck people, and he has good hands. Eckler, he stays in great shape, and I think he's a good complement to Brian Robinson, and they'll find creative ways to use them. And I think sometimes you also see them both in the backfield at the same time, which I think will be interesting. And then Philly with Saquon, even though he's on the downside, I think he's still got something left. Gainwell, like you said, I won't repeat everything there. And then the Giants, I do like Singletary. I think he can right the ship there for at least having a steady go-to back. And then Dallas, I'll put it at the bottom because, like you mentioned, Bob, Zeke's already on the downside, and then the Cowboys picked him up again, and then everyone else behind him, it doesn't inspire too much confidence. So, so I'm right in lockstep with Paul there.
Wow. Showed up just in time.
I did. I ran back. Sorry. I got kids running in here. It's all bananas. Bob, what do you got?
Pretty close. I'm gonna go Washington, Philly 1-2. I am gonna go Dallas at 3 and New York at 4. I don't want to repeat everything that everybody else has said. I wholeheartedly buy into pretty much everything Paul has said, as well as Tony. The only thing I'll add is I think we're going to see more of Eckler on first down and more. And I don't think we're going to see clearly defined, consistent roles for Eckler and Robinson. Robinson proved last year he can catch the football, as Tony mentioned. I think we're going to see Cliff Kingsbury make the defense play honest. They're not going to be able to go, oh wait, Austin Eckler's in. We should be playing the pass. Or Brian Robinson in, we're going to play run. I think we're going to see him mix the two guys up. We're going to see Eckler on first down some days. We're going to see Robinson on third down sometimes, and we're going to see both of them both carry and catch the ball. It's the whole concept of we have a dedicated third down back has bugged me no end for years and years and years. Going all the way back to Joe Gibbs, if there's one thing I could sit down and ask Gibbs about, it would be, why in the world did you clearly define these roles when it's a tell for the defense? And so I don't think I think Kingsbury will change that to a bit, or to a degree. Nothing to add about Philadelphia. Dallas in third, because in all honesty, I trust Zeke more than I trust Devin Singletary. I watched Devin Singletary several years. I had him a couple of years on my fantasy team. I don't know if it's Singletary or if it's the coaching in Buffalo, to be completely honest. But the guy never lived up to expectations in Buffalo. I don't feel like he lived up to expectations in Houston last year. And I don't see that changing in New York with a questionable quarterback situation and a fairly young team. So I think Zeke will have a better season and be a bigger part of the Dallas offense.
I'm gonna go bottom to top. I have no confidence Dallas is gonna actually be able to do anything with their running backs. I think Zeke was a product of the fact that they had the best offensive line in football for a lot of years. I think we saw more out of Zeke in New England about who he really is than we'll see in Dallas. I slightly gave the nod to the Giants above the Cowboys because I think Singletary can be a weapon in the passing game. I think Zeke that time has passed Zeke by. He might have a couple catches, but he's not going to be the guy that could break one off for 60 like he did in the past. Third or second in the division, I go Washington. I love our running back room for the versatility, but I don't see a guy that is going to just control an offense. Rodriguez or not Rodriguez, Robinson could be that guy, but I don't think anybody here would ever place a bet that Robinson's going to go for 1,400 yards. Eckler is an X factor, but Eckler's also north of 30. So there's other conversations we had. Philly, you have Saquon Barkley, who's an all-pro level talent. I don't think people are giving enough respect to Shipley. That guy is going to be a freaking force, in my opinion. He's going to be scary, dynamic. He's going to be versatile out of the backfield as a runner, between the tackles, outside the tackles. I think he has the ability to really be a big time player. And that doesn't mean he's going to hit 1,000 yards, but I think he's going to be the kind of guy that could sneak up on you for 2 or 3 plays a game. And he's going to make you hurt a little bit. And Gainwell's a guy that I've always liked. Don't like him that he's wearing Kelly Green, but I like the player he was coming out of college. So Philly, Washington, New York, and then Dallas. So, fellas, I don't know if we want to run down, like, I guess, do we try to rank what we ranked today and figure out a way to say this is 1, 2, 3, 4? What do you? It's hard because I'm looking at it. Philly is, I think, the clear cut winner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think overall,
Offensively,
Philly
I
would.
think Philly's the better team. Next, I think I hate to say it, but looking at because I wrote it all down is Dallas.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Philly, Dallas, Washington, New York.
yeah, New York
Yeah.
is clearly 4. I think Washington
Yeah.
could sneak up on Dallas in a couple position groups, and I think Daniels could find himself in the conversation with Dak Prescott. Am I saying he's as good as him? Not at this point. It's a hard argument to make, but I don't think anybody if we were have this conversation 6 months from now and say Dak Prescott is the 14th ranked quarterback and Jaden Daniels is the 16th, would anybody be surprised?
No, probably
Yeah.
not.
I don't think that's like a mind blowing concept that could.
No.
Right. So I think that's the ultimate factor there is the quarterback. If Jaden Daniels can play up to middle of the pack, and if Dak doesn't play as well as ESPN says he's going to, I think that's going to really affect how we actually look at the offenses.
Oh, and so I went and looked it up while other guys were talking. Dak has been tagged twice. He's playing the back end of his second. So he was tagged and played a year on the tag. Remember, Dak was a 3rd-round pick, so they didn't have a 5th-year option on him.
Mm-hmm.
So he played 4 years on his rookie deal. He got tagged, played a year on the tag, then he got tagged again, And then the day after he got tagged, he signed a 4-year deal that runs out at the end of this year. They cannot tag him at the end of this year because he's officially been tagged twice. The dude's playing under some pressure this year, and it's pressure that he's done to himself. He and Dallas couldn't agree on a contract. He chose to bet on himself. We'll see what that does to his play on the field this year.
Well, fellas, it's been a pleasure. We'll be back up next week, right? Next week to run down some of the defensive skill positions. And then I believe the following week we're going to run down the actual O-line versus D-line, position by position. So
That's good.
it's been good to see you guys again. It's been a little while, but I miss these beautiful faces. All right, fellas. Have a good night.
Yep. Good night, guys.
All right, guys.